Coming up on This Week in Radio Tech, I'm talking to Chris Tarr. I love these episodes where we just spend the whole hour together talking about something that Chris is really expert at. And this time we're talking about automation systems. Now, Chris, like me, has been through a lot of different automation brands. We kind of know our way around these things. And Chris has some great advice about how to get started, how to select, how to see what automation might be right for you, and then how to keep it going. How to use it best. That's coming up next on TWiRT.
This Week in Radio Tech is brought to you by Broadcasters General Store with outstanding service, savings, and support. Online at bgs.cc. By Broadcast Bionics with the Bionics Studio, including talk show control, social media, and visual radio. Broadcast Bionics brings exceptional audience engagement to radio and TV. By Aiir, featuring PlayoutONE radio automation software, comprehensive streaming solutions, website content management, and social media tools for maximum listener engagement on the web at aiir.com. By Angry Audio. Audio problems disappear when you get angry at angryaudio.com. And by Max Connect Wireless, prioritized high-speed internet service designed for transmitter sites and remote broadcasts.
Hey, welcome into This Week in Radio Tech, the show where we talk about everything from the microphone to that light bulb at the top of the tower. Hello, I'm Kirk Harnack, your host, and I'm delighted to be here. I'm in Nashville, Tennessee, in the Telos Alliance studio here in Nashville, which also happens to be my office. And it's decorated with, lots of Telos Alliance stuff. Oh, look, I'm even wearing my NASCAR Telos Alliance shirt today, which I guess I often try to wear some swag on the show. So it's just a typical cruddy, cloudy, cold winter day here in Nashville, but we're going to brighten your spirits because we're going to talk about some cool stuff today with the master, the teacher himself, my co-host, and today also our guest. I don't know if I have budget to pay him twice, but he's here, and that's Chris Tarr. Hey, Chris, welcome in.
Howdy. We got away with not having winter for a long time up here. I mean, it had been so long since we had any kind of measurable snow until last night. And then we had a winter storm warning and we got dumped with about 6 inches of snow. And then I just got an alert that we have another winter storm warning coming up for tomorrow night for even more snow. So for the first time, I had to have the driveway and the sidewalks plowed. And I'm looking out my window right now and everything's covered in white. So I think, it's all been waiting up until this moment to just dump on everything. So, again, fortunately, I don't have much to do, so I don't have to go try to trek around in this stuff, although I did last night. And I'll tell you what, the snow sucks. However, if you got a Jeep, it is a lot of fun to drive in.
What model Jeep are you driving around in?
I have a Jeep Cherokee, and so I just threw her into four-wheel drive and went spinning around, and it was fun. I had to pick up my daughter from work. I wasn't going to let her drive into stuff, so I went and got her, threw it to four-wheel drive, and just plowed through it all. It was great.
Oh, that's awesome. That is so awesome. Good deal. Yeah. So, Chris, I talked to you about doing another Back to Basics show today. And I thought, we've covered a number of topics earlier in this year. The first two shows of 2025 were Back to Basics show. And I thought, we really haven't spent much time on radio automation. And automation has been on my mind a lot, mostly because we just got done moving 8 radio stations on the island of Maui from one location to another and going to all new automation systems at the new location. And that means a lot of setup, a lot of file transfers, a lot of logs, a lot of connecting contact closures for the news talk stations, setting up FTP downloads and recording things. And of course, Hawaii is several hours time zone difference than the bulk of the USA mainland. So a lot of things are shifted in time. So you got to get your automations to do all those kind of things. We have a lot of voice trackers. We probably have 15 voice trackers all around the country doing voice tracking for us. So that's just some of the aspects. But Chris, you have a lot of experience with automation systems yourself, and I thought that we would take a show to describe what are the important considerations in automation systems, and considering that we have viewers and listeners of all levels here, whether you're a beginner or just kind of maybe you're thinking about choosing an automation system and you're a little confused, or you have your eye on one, you wonder if that's the right one, or you're an experienced user and you wonder, can my automation system do more? Or maybe you even haven't thought, can it do more? You're just kind of settled in with the way it is. So Chris, Mr. Maestro, Maestra, that's the Spanish word for professor. Maybe we could get started. Just cover one question. Then, of course, we've got a quick opening ad to do, but
Sure.
give us a little preview of what are some basics we're going to look at today.
Well, I think the most important one is determining what you need. Instead of going for the Ferrari, do you need that much power? Do you need something? Do you need a Ferrari or do you need just a regular basic commuter car? So there's a lot of questions revolving around that because oftentimes you'll hear people say, "Oh, you need to get this," and it does everything. Well, do you really need to do everything? I think that is a very important consideration, especially when you look at the price points. You've got everywhere from free to tens of thousands of dollars for a system. So really, that I think that's the first thing we need to talk about is, how do you determine what system are you going to get, and what do you need? And there's a lot of considerations to take, to think about when you're looking at that.
Cool. We'll tell you what. We'll jump right into it right after this. One of our new sponsor is Aiir, AIIR, because the internet, I guess AIR was already taken, AIIR.com. And I got a chance to talk with Ricky Lee, the CEO, and he wants to tell us about their streaming services. Hey, it's Kirk Harnack, and I'm here with Ricky Lee, the CEO of Aiir. Ricky, you guys make a fantastic automation system, but streaming is a really big deal. Tell me about streaming with Aiir.
It really is. We've got a beautiful streaming platform with an incredible dashboard with fantastic analytics. And you can buy it for just $20 a month. All you can eat. No limits on bandwidth or bit rates. And you can also record shows as well. So if you like to deliver on-demand content for $20 a month, you can stream and deliver that on-demand content to an RSS feed that can feed your radio player, your mobile apps, or a podcast that people can download and enjoy.
Now, $20 a month, that must be for just some slow MP3, right?
No, MP3, AAC, and we also now support HLS, which is big in the industry right now.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. How do I start to explore or find out more about streaming through Aiir?
You go to aiir.com, AIIR.com/streaming, and from there, with a credit card, you can sign up and get started.
That is so cool. We're going to check it out ourselves, but Aiir.com, AIR.com, and you can find their stream. Of course, they do radio automation too, and I'm pretty familiar with their automation because that's what we're using across our 21 radio stations. But we're here to talk about all automation and the features and things that you need to look for and what does it do. Chris, I kind of wanted to start with the idea of, fundamentally, what is radio automation? And Chris, when you were but a child, we had reel-to-reel machines playing automation, and people would send us tapes. I mean, we'd pay for them, and they sent us tapes, and these tapes had music on them, and then we had to program these carts, and these little whirly-giggy things would go around and play spots at just the right time, and then we had two carts that would play the time, and they'd advance every minute, and they would play, it's 7:34. And then the next one would be, it's 7:35. And Lord help you if the power went out for a while and they got out of sync. So automation systems, the whole idea here is to play what you want to play on your radio station on a schedule, making sure that the audience is entertained by what you're playing. They get what they expect, and your commercials are running, and then all the other elements like bumpers and liners and jingles. And then if you have some live elements, that those get put on the air at the right time too. So I just wanted to point out what automation does. We started doing it on computers back in the late 80s, and computers then were barely capable of getting this done. But now here we are in the 2025, and frankly, a $300 computer can typically run an automation system as long as it's not being a file server as well, and you can get on the air with something inexpensive. Not necessarily the best way to go, but you may be able to do that. So from that introduction to what is an automation system, Chris, what do we need to think about next about these?
Well, even backing up, automation systems originally weren't necessarily for making sure things played the way they're supposed to play. It was, how can we save money? Early on, automation systems were big for FMs that were really, in the heyday of AM, FMs weren't making any money. So how can we put a product on the air without, having to have staff there? And a lot of these stations were beautiful music and things like that didn't really need tight segues or tight formatting. So it really loaned itself to running reel-to-reels and cart decks, the old go-karts. And the old the pegboards to program the automation and things like that. Then it became, I think really the first round of automation came about with satellite music services and syndicated programming. It used to be one of my first jobs in high school was because there hadn't been automation systems yet. We played satellite music network, and my job was to, on the local breaks, pop down the satellite feed, play the local spots, and put the satellite feed back up. So I was getting paid to do that. So, really the first automation system was kind of meant to just insert spots. Then we got into, the programming for satellite stuff. Because if you remember, early on, hard drives weren't very big, and neither were sound cards. They weren't very powerful. So it didn't really lend itself to music. And then later on, we started to do things with CD jukeboxes and that sort of thing because at least we could get good quality audio through it. And we started with aptX cards, and I know Computer Concepts DCS ran aptX, which at least gave you 16 kilohertz audio. You could compress a lot of audio on a hard drive. Then all of a sudden, it exploded. Why? Well, hard drive space, storage space became essentially unlimited and pennies to store all this data. So all of a sudden you could do uncompressed audio and make it sound fantastic. And so with that, it was, it started going into, okay, these hours where we don't have live people, we can put this stuff on there, and then, it just went from there. But you got to remember the basics of an automation system are, first and foremost, it's got to be able to play back audio and do it in a way that sounds natural, segueing songs, playing jingles when they're supposed to play, that sort of thing. And then second of all, they have to be reliable. You don't want to get a call at 3 a.m. from your silent sensor because your automation system stopped. So, I mean, that's really kind of the bare bones. Here's what an automation system does. It takes a playlist, however it gets there. I know there are some systems like SAM where you can just put music in there and create a template, and it'll create its own playlist. Or take one that's generated, natural log or selector or music master. Um, you've got a traffic log and a music log. Those two, mesh together at the last point and then get sent off to the automation system. So that's really at its base what an automation system does. It plays things back, and it plays things back in an order that you determine. So now that we've kind of got that out of the way, what are some of the things you want to look for? Well, again, the answer is kind of, it depends. Now, in my situation, we don't really do any automated or any satellite programming or things like that. All of our stuff is voice tracked. So do we really need an automation system that can do everything? No, we're not time shifting. We're not doing, any kind of real tricky relay things. So, we're able to get away with a, lot leaner system to make things happen. And in my experience, I found that, systems that do everything are great, but with added features comes added complexity. And sometimes, that can be a drawback if you don't need that complexity because things stop working or they don't work the way they're supposed to. And you don't really need that stuff. So you've introduced complexity into a situation where you don't really need complexity. So when you're going to start out looking at automation systems, first of all, you're going to be intimidated. Every time I've run into a new automation system, it's intimidated me. And I'm going, I'm never going to learn this. And sure enough, a month or two in, I can have it do whatever I want. So, keep that in mind as you look at these. You're probably going to be intimidated by what you see with these different systems and how they work. But in reality, they're really not bad. They're pretty easy to learn. And, there's all of the systems are supported pretty well, so you shouldn't have any issues with that. But, as you go into this, you need to look at what's your budget and what do you want to do. And there are situations where, excuse me, there are systems that are, let's look at WideOrbit, for example, a very popular system, very expensive, but you get what you pay for in that situation, in that they have, fantastic support. It does do anything you throw at it, it works, and it's stable. So, excuse me. So in that situation, that may work for you, but it has a lot of stuff, and it is pretty expensive. There are a lot of systems that will play, whatever you need, and we'll do that without having to have all those bells and whistles. So, if you're just looking at playing music, yeah, Wide Orbit will do that, but so will a whole lot of other systems. So I'm going to pass this off for you just for a second. I got to get something to drink. My bronchitis throat is kicking up, and I'm going to
No
start
worries.
coughing.
Hey, I love what you're bringing up, the things that you're saying, and I'll dovetail just a little bit, yes, and onto the end of what you said. People often ask, well, what automation system is best, or what's adequate for my needs? And to me, automation systems, I'm sure every manufacturer, every company that writes the software to run automation is very proud of the way that they've done things, and they think their way is best. And for them, it probably is. And for the people who know how to make their automation, that brand of automation system run, it is the best, because the automation system that's best is the one that you are comfortable with, the one that you know how to use. So it's a lot like a multi-track recorder. When people say, "Oh, should I get Adobe Audition, or should I just use Audacity, or should I get that Sony thing, or whatever, something open source maybe?" And the answer is, use the one that you like. I know people still using Cool Edit Pro because that's what they learned, and they don't want to learn anything else. They're fast with the shortcuts, and they can edit stuff. It's very similar with automation systems. Of course, you got to change with the times. If the company that you were working with no longer supports, whatever the automation operating system is around now, then you really can't do that.
And you
Go ahead.
You also want to be careful of, I like this system, therefore, that's what we have to use, because that might not be appropriate. For example, when I was with Intercom, I did a lot of Wide Orbit installs, traveled all over the country. We used Wide Orbit at our local stations. I know it inside and out. I can make that thing do anything. But in my situation now, it's not practical. It's really not. It doesn't fit what we needed to do. And at first, when I first started working with Magnum, we used Simian, and I went, "Oh, this is a joke." Simian's just a toy. We need something real like Wide Orbit. Well, in reality, we don't need 90% of the features that Wide Orbit has, nor do we need that price tag. Simian is affordable. It does exactly what we want. And so I took the time to learn it. And I realized that it actually is pretty powerful. And as I learned it and I got comfortable with it, all of a sudden now it's not that big of a deal. So, everybody has their favorites, but you want to be careful because you don't want your history to guide where you're going, because that might not be appropriate for your situation.
That's a really, really good point. Just because you're comfortable with something doesn't mean it's the right thing going forward for what you need to do next. And I would, we're about to hit a break here, but at our stations, in my relationship with Larry Fuss and some other people who have 21 radio stations now, we have been through several different automation systems, including Rivendell. There were good things to like about Rivendell. And then we've been through a fair amount of Audio Vault, and there were plenty of things to like about Audio Vault. We ended up a few years ago trying what became PlayoutONE, and then we really liked what the people at PlayoutONE were doing in terms of development. If we needed a feature and it didn't have it, they would say, "Well, tell us exactly how you want that to work." And PlayoutONE would develop it. So we were one of the first stations with PlayoutONE to do satellite-based automation in a news talk way. So we're constantly bringing, other various different satellite sources in, and of course muting the ones that we're not using, and then going back to the log to play spots and bumpers and liners and all that kind of thing. So on the one hand, it could be dangerous going with a company that's kind of fresh into this. On the other hand, that may be a company that wants to develop and do things the way you want to. We found doing contact closures in Rivendell, I always had to call Fred Gleason. I could never figure it out. And of course, he had it totally memorized. Well, you got to do this and this and that and that, and open this module and do this and this. And to me, it was like, that's very Byzantine, but it made sense in their world. So everybody handles that, a little bit differently.
Well, And
Go ahead.
that's what you want to check for when you're shopping for automation systems. You know, everybody will give you, you know, free trials, or you can run it. You know, say something like Enco, which is very powerful, but you buy it in blocks. So they have, you know, their basic system, which is playout, and then you can buy into additional features. Um, and so, you know, it can be as powerful as and as expensive as a WideOrbit if you buy all of their modules, or it can be very basic and very affordable if you just need playout. So, you know, again, that's what you're looking for when you go to shop these things is the most important thing is, what do you want to do? You know, what is it that you need to have it done? And keep in mind that sometimes, you know, that the other thing is, how comfortable are you with technology? Because there are some systems that are very easy to use, but because of that, you can't get into the guts and kind of hack it. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Whereas some of these other systems that are, as you say, Byzantine, you know, opens up a lot of doors for hacking, and even on your own, making things work the way they're, you know, not the way they're supposed to, but maybe work for you. So, you know, those are all things you want to take into consideration.
Gotcha. Good deal. Good points. Hey, coming up, we're going to talk about automation systems and voice tracking, how that works, and also you know, incoming contact closures. There's different ways to handle that. You know, when is that necessary? Whether it's a standalone or a multi-station system, and maybe even some advice about, hey, I've got a group of stations. Should all of them be on the same automation system, or does one of them have a different enough need? It needs to be on a different automation system. Is that a good idea or not? We'll talk to Chris Tarr, the master, about this. And coming up, our show is brought to you in part by our good friends at Broadcast Bionics. I got to tell you, I can't tell you what it is, but I just got some really good news about Broadcast Bionics today. And you know, I've worked with them over the years. They've been a great partner to my employer, Telos Alliance, and we're about to see some more good things coming down the pike. Not yet. We'll have announcements, I'm sure, later on, but I'm really excited about this company, Broadcast Bionics. We're going to hear from them and be right back.
Welcome to the Bionic Studio. The Bionic Studio brings all audience interaction to the fingertips of a production team in radio, TV, and podcast. Our workflow-led system is working 24/7 around the world for small broadcasters and national and international networks. Our telephony module, Bionic Talk Show, allows cost-effective centralization, remote operation, scalability, and resilience across an entire network of stations, but at the same time is used in single-studio self-op environments. Social media curation and activity is now considered a broadcast critical part of programming. Bionic Social means the studio isn't overwhelmed with a wall of interaction from an ever-growing number of social platforms. We combine SMS, MMS, and email together with a speech-to-text service for listeners using smart speakers. We enable studio teams to curate, filter, and display all platforms in one place, and post text, images, and video content to multiple platforms in one operation. Effortless collection of video content with Bionic Director has helped position some of the world's most successful stations as leaders in viral content, generating appointments to listen and free marketing via retweets and shares. Bionic Contest enables end-to-end tracking of on-air competitions, live reads, and prizes. These could be on-air contests, automated SMS entry, or online. Anywhere, and Skype TX for Radio brings high-quality audio and video contribution into the studio with ease. No need for dedicated PCs to run different applications. Everything is controlled within the Bionic Studio UI, and incoming connections are visible to users along with all other platforms. Our codec integration enables connection, algorithm configuration, and directory to a wide range of IP and ISDN codecs. The Bionic Studio, a unique suite of products designed to enable your talent to work smarter.
You know, we're talking about radio automation, and Bionic Studio is kind of like automating your operations in your control room. So check out the things that they can do for you. You can get those modules they talked about modularly or all together. They can do a lot for you at Broadcast Bionics. Bionics.co.uk. Check them out. They have dealers all over the world. Probably one of your favorite broadcast equipment dealers is also a dealer for Broadcast Bionics. I'm Kirk Harnack. It's This Week in Radio Tech, our episode number 735. We've been around over 15 years now, and Chris Tarr is Oh, he's been slogging through it the whole time. Have you've been here the whole time, haven't you, Chris? I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah. Show
even
number
when
one on
Chris,
TWiRT or on Twit rather.
yeah, yeah, and even when Chris Tobin was my co-host officially for a number of years, you were a guest from time to time. So, yeah,
Yep.
good. So we're talking about automation systems and what you might need to know about automation systems. Chris, what would you like to delve into next?
Oh, let's see.
I kind of teased voice tracking and how that can work for
Sure.
people because some systems offer it, some don't. Some it's more convenient
Right.
than others. And so yeah, maybe you got some experience with voice tracking.
Absolutely. Now, and here's the other thing: is all automation systems can do voice tracking if you're creative enough. So, there is that. But, obviously, voice tracking is a big part of what we do today. And there are a whole lot of different ways that people voice track. Some do it in the studio, some do it from home. And so you have to kind of determine how you want to make that happen. And then, it goes into how do you get those voice tracks from point A to point B? There are a lot of systems that have voice track software that you can put on a computer, but then in order to get the voice tracks to the automation system, there has to be some sort of VPN or something like that, some kind of connection to get that audio from that person's computer to the server. So, there are some technology things you need to look at internally, some infrastructure pieces that have to be in place for that to work. Now we have kind of a creative solution to that, which makes it really easy. What we do is with Simian, we have the voice track module, and they actually have a system that you can buy for voice tracking that uses a VPN. You connect to this and that. We've realized that we just use Dropbox, and so what we do is we have each station has a Dropbox folder with the songs and the logs and everything else. And then as you record, your voice tracks go into Dropbox, and that syncs and drops it onto the server, where it then gets copied to whatever machine you want. So we completely eliminate the need for confusing people with VPN connections and things like that, because that's the other thing is you're dealing with on-air people, and they may not be the most technically savvy. So we're able to put together a microphone and an interface and log into their computer and throw Dropbox on there along with the voice track software, and they're good to go. I voice track every day, and it's really simple. Um, but again, it's very basic. You don't get waveform editors or things like that. You kind of get blocks that you can edit. So it works fine for us. We love it a lot. But there are also other great solutions out there. I know that WideOrbit's voice tracking solution is fantastic as well. And they do some really cool things with voice tracking. But again, we don't need that horsepower. You might. And that's where, again, you need to talk to, it's very important that you talk to, program directors, the DJs, traffic people, and you really want to get a sense of what you're going to need because once you invest in an automation system, you're stuck with it for a while. So you want to make sure going into this that you're not going to get one of those situations where all of a sudden, program director says, "Oh, I want to do this," and you have a system that can't do it. And had you known it ahead of time, you may have made a different decision. So it's really important to sit down with everybody involved, go through a demo. Understand that there's a good chance that if it's different from what people are used to, they're not going to like it. And, that's okay. But, nobody likes to have the cheese moved. And whenever you switch systems, I think I told the story once where I was putting in WideOrbit at a station and the morning guy didn't want it and fought tooth and nail for it. But the reality is he was going to get it. And, so he had to get on board. But I find that it's a lot easier to know going in, what's available. And then there are things, to consider when switching automation systems, such as can you import your current library? Because if you can't, it's going to be a lot more difficult. Um, a lot of the big names now have tools to import your library from whatever system you had. I know when I went from WideOrbit or from Audio Vault to WideOrbit, we just had to send them a hard drive with all of our stuff, and they were able to extract it into the proper format as WAV files or whatever, and create a database of those songs. And so the switch was really pretty easy to do. So that that's a big consideration with voice tracking, is A, do you need to do it? And B, at what level? What if you have two people? What if, you have voice trackers all over? Or again, what if you're just doing it in the studio? What do you need to do that? And
Yeah.
and most systems have their own software. Now you could even do something as simple as, if you don't want to get fancy with voice tracking and you have a system that doesn't do it, putting in blank carts and then re-recording them with voices and dropping them into your server and importing them. I mean, it's not elegant, but it works. So,
Sure.
those are all things you need to look at when you're doing voice tracking.
I'd like to bring up, and I know they're a sponsor, but they're wondering their sponsors because I do like them. The folks at PlayoutONE have a voice tracking system that is web based. So our remote disc jockeys just go to a web URL, they log in with their credentials, and then because it's them that's logged in, it automatically takes them to the part of the log that's their show. And then they have the markers, for whether it's 3 or 4 or 6, voice tracks per hour, whatever it may be. And then they get emailed, the pertinent information. The Kiwanis Club is meeting, Thursday at noon. Come on down to the hot dog sale, and hey, Joan Chevrolet is having a big deal this weekend. Bring the kids. So they're given all that information, and of course the upcoming weather. They promote that, but the web interface. And I'm going to try to approach this from a technical point of view. I guess they're using WebRTC. I don't know that for sure, but you get a web interface and it shows you the song that's ending. It does show you the waveform. It lets you then, record your part when you're supposed to, and then start the next element. Maybe you're talking over the next song, or maybe you're going, dry into a hard into a spot break. And you can then, of course, go back and slide your voice track in relation to the other stuff. Hey, I could have started talking earlier over the end of that song, or whoops, that's right, I forgot that song ends cold. I need to let it stop and then say something, right? So you could do all that. What I also find interesting is when you're speaking into the voice tracker, you're hearing yourself, of course, but it's not going to use that audio that you did live just then. It's not recording at the other end. The moment you stop recording that, it recorded your file on the local computer, on your laptop at home, and then it uploads that. That way, if there was a burble, if there was a missed packet on the internet, you're not dealing with a voice track that is somehow imperfect. You're taking the local file and uploading that. And with most modern connections, it happens in under 5 seconds. So that's a really cool way to voice track. I'm sure other automation systems may do similar things. Some have an app that you put on your own computer, and that's fine too. That may give you even more power. But I just think it's really cool that this has been reduced to the stuff that you can do in a browser, and you're not reducing the functionality at all. You have lots of functionality. You can also go live. Now, when you go live, that is your voice over WebRTC or whatever they're doing. Going live on the air, but you can hear what's coming in, you can talk, and you can hit the next thing, and you can go live that way. I think that companies are becoming much more sophisticated over how their voice tracking works. Back in the mid 90s when I worked for Scott Studios, voice tracking was a complicated thing, and Dave Scott figured some of it out. Back in those early days, some of it, I think it was done like over a phone line, and you'd listen for the end of your song, and then you'd talk. And then you'd hit the next thing. There were some early, toe stubbing along the way as we dealt with computers that weren't nearly as capable as they are today.
Sure, and we can talk about there are automation systems now that are entirely web based. I'm not quite there yet in my mind, but sure, there's voice tracking software that is on the web. I like, the one nice thing about the voice tracking system that we use, and most of the ones that are software based, and I think some of the web based ones too, is you use hotkeys to do your functions. Well, what I did is I bought a little $30 gaming 3-key programmable keyboard, little pad, and I
Yeah,
programmed start, stop, and next. And so I can just have my 3 fingers on this keypad and, start, record, stop, next. And I can do that all with those 3 keys instead of clicking mice or, slapping keyboards or something. I have it right by my hand, near the mouse, and I just do it that
yeah.
way. So, there are different there are a lot of different options that you have when you kind of open your mind a little bit to make voice tracking easy. And yes, voice tracking has become so important to this business that it's almost that's almost the first thing you've got to think about when you're going to buy an automation system is the voice tracking element.
Chris, one of the things that our stations are doing a lot of, maybe some of you guys are too, is we're using third party morning shows or evening shows that come in via FTP. And they're either just in time delivery, or maybe we're in a different time zone, so they're an hour ahead, or maybe this morning show, starts at 4 a.m. wherever they are, or in Hawaii where we're, easily 4 or 5 hours behind whatever the morning show is. But we do, several of our stations do use Murphy, Sam, and Jody. And they're out of Louisiana, and they have a fun morning show, 3 people talking about topical stuff. It's stuff that almost anybody can relate to. And they do the way they record their local liners that play first, it just smooths right in. So we download their FTP breaks, and then they just go into the log. So it's not really voice tracking. It's topical fun. And the other shows have done it this way too. We have another one. I'm sorry, somebody in Raven. I forget somebody's name, but we have several similar shows that are done in the similar way. We also do John Tesh. John Tesh will does breaks, and of course he records custom liners. But it's neat to hear John Tesh on a couple of our star format stations giving intelligence for your life. That's what he does. He doesn't intro the songs, of course, but it's interesting to hear what he is doing. I wanted to ask about one mistake I see people ask about. They obviously don't quite know. When you get an automation system, you can't just put it on the air. You can't just import a few songs and expect to get going. There's a lot of prep work to do to get an automation system to play the format that you want to on the air with all the elements that you're going to play. So maybe you could address that. What are some of the preparatory steps? And people in radio who have done this before, they kind of know this. But if you haven't done this before, if this is new to you, what are some of the big accomplishments you need to do before you can expect the automation system to know what to do and to put your format on the air?
Well, I think first and foremost is logs. How are you going to tell the system what to play? Most radio automation systems will not play audio without having some sort of log put together. So, you really have to first and foremost figure out how your music scheduling system and your commercial scheduling system, how are they going to interface with the automation system? How are those logs, those finished logs, going to get into your system together? The music and the spots in the right place to create one log. How is that going to get into the system? And vice versa, when you want to be able to go back and reconcile those logs, can you get that log back as an as played log and then import that back into your traffic and your music system to reconcile those logs to know what you did or didn't play? So, I mean, that's really step number one, because without music or spots or a log, the automation system isn't going to do you any good. So that's number one. Number two is then, what formats does your audio need to be in? Nowadays, if you're not doing waves, you got a problem. You really should be doing waves, at least for your on-air audio, for the music. For the spots and everything, you can use, MP2, MP3, AAC, whatever you want to do for that. But for your music, you really need to use wave files. So then you have to determine, as part of this, how much storage do you need? How big is your library going to be? We had a situation where, I have one station that was a top 40 station. They maybe had 150 songs in rotation at any given time. But then I had a AAA station that had probably 3,000 songs in their library. So that station obviously got much more hard drive space. Then you also have to consider, okay, you've got all this music. What's your backup plan? So, all of these things need to be determined before you go into it. And then, then you start doing with test logs, fire test log off. Do things play the way they're supposed to play? Do you have your functions set up? How does it need to know when the top of the hour has been reached and it needs to load the next hour? I mean, all of these things you just don't think about, but they're there. How do you resync? For example, if you schedule 70 minutes of music in an hour, you don't want your system to play all that 70 minutes and then start the next
Ah,
hour 10 minutes late. How does your
yeah.
system, how do you program the system to know what to drop when you've reached the top of the hour? When do you sync that? What are you able to drop? I've seen systems where it's a hard top of the hour and they could be in a commercial break and they drop the rest of the stop set to go into the next hour. You don't want that
Ooh,
either. And then
no.
even a further consideration is for things like sports games and satellite automation. How does your system take breaks? How does it know what logs to load? I mean, nowadays, your automation system should be able to, on its own, know when a game starts, load the separate log for the game, and then take you back to your pre-programmed log when that game is over. So, these are all things you need to know before you put this together because, you're going to have this able to play back and automate these things, but these out of the box, these systems are dumb. They don't really and they're dumb by on purpose because everybody's situation is different. So they come out of the box not being able to really automate anything. You have to tell it what it's going to do. And a lot of that is with those logs, which is why it's so important to know what log formats you're using. And sometimes you have to tweak the output of your systems. For example, with natural log, you may have to change the output format of your schedule to make it make sense to the automation system when it
Ah,
imports. So,
yeah.
however you make that happen, those are all things that you're going to have to do before you can even turn the thing on and get it working. So, those are all considerations. What are you doing? What are you using for music software? How are you going to get the music into the library? It doesn't just magically appear. Can you have a database of music that it imports, or do you have to do it, oh my goodness, one song at a time or whatever? You have to get your numbering set up so that um, the numbering of your music is the same as the numbering you're using in your music scheduling, so the right things play. Those are all considerations you have to think about.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. I've seen my business partner Larry Fuss spend a lot of time setting up an automation system with the right categories and asking, "Hey, can I import music from this other automation system? Will that work?" "Oh, yes, we have a routine to do that." It seems like many of the companies now recognize what other automation system formats are in their database or to import music. Hey, we're going to be talking coming up about hey, what's your operating system? What about support? What special things are there to do in your operating system as far as configuration? We'll talk about not letting Windows reboot because of an update. So there's things that you need to think about, and what kind of hardware is your automation system going to run on? Are you getting that from the automation company, or are you providing your own hardware? Could you go with audio over IP, or are you going to be using a hardware sound card? These ideas coming up with Chris Tarr. He's our master of ceremony. Well, he's our professor today. I guess I'm sort of the MC. All right, Chris, you're about to be on mic again because you're going to be talking about a mic processor from Angry Audio. They offer two different models, and they're not what you think. They didn't design them to work with any mic. What have you got there, Chris, in terms of mic
Oh
processing?
man, well, as I alluded to earlier, I do voice tracking on one of our stations, and I do a lot of voice work for spots and commercials and things like that. So, Angry Audio has two fantastic mic processors. If you look back at how mic processors work and what's available out there, there's a lot of knobs and a lot of tweaking, and it's always people exchanging what are your special settings to make it sound good. So, as Catfish does, he was coming up with an idea for a mic processor, and he said to Cornelius Gold, "Well, Corny, there's a lot of knobs on a mic processor. Is there a way we can kind of reduce that? The amount of things you need to tweak?" And Corny obviously said, "Well, that's hard because the reason you have so many controls is there's so many different microphones out there, that you could have." And Catfish, in a moment of brilliance that he often has, says, "What if we knew what kind of microphone we were going to use?" And Courtney went, "Oh, that would be so much easier because we could tailor a lot of the foundation to work with that particular microphone." And that's what they did. They have the Rebel and the Smooth on their Chameleon line. And what they are is the Rebel. It's RE out of Revel, stands for the RE20 or the RE27, RE320. And then the smooth is SM for smooth, and that's for the SM5, the SM7, pretty much anything that uses that same capsule. And what's so cool about these boxes is most of the algorithms already built in. So they sound great right out of the box. But you do have a little bit of tweaking that you can do. You can thicken it up, you can increase the bass a little bit, you can increase the treble a little bit. But best of all, you can't make it sound bad. No matter what you do, it sounds great. It's the first processor I've ever used where I turn the de-esser on because you can't hear it. All these other de-essers, you turn them on and all of a sudden your S's get dulled and there's no high end on it. Not this one. The de-esser on this one is transparent. You really don't hear it working. And then it doesn't have a traditional gate. It has something called the room size. And what it does is it almost in a way increases or decreases the room sound that you're hearing in your ears. It's fantastic. And one of those microphones, I always loved, those microphones where you lean back a little bit and your presence is still right there. It's still in your face, no matter where you put your head near the microphone. This does that. It does it, and it doesn't sound bad. It doesn't sound overly compressed. It sounds natural. I probably have the best sounding voice tracks on any of our stations because of the Rebel and my RE20, and I like to make them jealous about that. And I like to make them jealous. And I got a B stock, so I got a great deal when I bought mine. But anyway, these are my processors that are they're fantastic for especially studio use where you have a lot of different personalities coming in because it sounds good from personality to personality. No more tweaking for each person that comes in. The microphone does all of its stuff with Corny's famous algorithms, and it makes you sound good without having to do a whole lot of tweaking. Like I said, there's only a couple of controls on this thing, and that's it. And that's all you need with this. So be sure to check it out. Get a demo, and I guarantee you, you are going to love this thing as much as I love mine. You're going to have to pry it from my cold, dead hands. So check it out. It is the Audio Chameleon, the Smooth, and the Rebel for SM7 and RE20s. Contact your favorite dealer today to get your hands on one.
They're coming out with a new model. You said they work with different personalities. We've got a couple of jocks that have multiple personalities, and I just wonder if it'll work for them too.
Oh, well, why not? If you get that and then a good psychiatrist, you're all set.
All right. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Angry Audio, for sponsoring This Week in Radio Tech. Our show is also brought to you by Max Connect. Max Connect does a lot of things. I was just talking to Josh Bone last week. What a great guy running a great company. Max Connect, they do engineering services. They will build studios. They put in complicated for them. It becomes easy for you. Remote control systems. If you got a lot of stuff to remote control, they'll make it easy for you and watch everything and give you alarms if you need that. But they also make this thing called the U.192. What is that? Well, it's a USB connected sound card, but this is no ordinary sound card. One of the things about FM broadcasting is, we do have this multiplex signal. Some people call it the composite signal. And this is all the things that go into an FM exciter. This is the left plus right, the stereo pilot, the left minus right, and typically the RDS signal that's in there as well at 57 kilohertz. And each portion of this signal is very well defined and needs to be transmitted and carried to the transmitter just exactly right. Well, the U192 is an MPX USB sound card. And what that means is you can use one of these software FM audio processors that have become pretty popular. There's the Omnia SST, there's Stereo Tool, there's Breakaway One, and you can use one of these processors. The problem, though, is when you're running an FM processor in a computer, how do you get that stereo audio out to your exciter or to your STL system that is going to carry multiplex to the transmitter site? And there are a few, off-the-shelf sound cards that kind of sort of do it, but none of them are perfect. And this is where you want perfection. This is where you don't want just 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz audio like, most sound cards can do. You need what they've designed into the U.192. Now, this box is actually largely designed and totally built by the folks over at Angry Audio. So the quality is amazing. It's really good. And Josh Bone's company said, we need to build this for the industry. So you connect it to your computer via USB, and it gives you digital and analog ins and outs. But the key is it also gives you a composite output that your software, your FM processing software, will create a beautiful digitally created MPX signal, and it will go out the composite output of this box. So it's exactly what you need if you want to do your own FM processor, and a lot of people are. I got some on some of my stations. So check this thing out from Max Connect, MAXXKONNECT.com. Max Connect. We'll have a link in the show notes for the U.192. Okay, Chris and I are talking about automation systems. And Chris, let's talk a little hardware and software in terms of your operating system. Most people are familiar with Windows, but automation systems come designed for different operating systems. Tell me what you know.
Sure. Well, there's a couple that they run on Linux. There's some that run. There's one in particular that runs on Mac. I don't recall the name of that one, but most of them do run Windows. So be prepared that 9 times out of 10, you're going to need Windows. If it's web based, then obviously that's platform agnostic. So keep in mind you're probably going to use Windows, which means you're going to need some sort of PC. Now, we build ours off the shelf. Most automation systems give you the option of doing off the shelf or using their hardware. So that's certainly an option. And also keep in mind that, some combinations of hardware work better than others. In our situation, we found a combination of hardware that works perfectly. I mean, we have zero issues with the systems that we build. So, we figured out the winning combination, and so we actually stockpile the parts that we need in case something runs out and we can't get our hands on it anymore. Obviously, if you buy it through the automation company, it's their responsibility to support it. So you get some options that way. There's all kinds of different ways to do this. If you get something like Smarts, that runs on Linux, they build the systems, they maintain it. That's a benefit if you don't have an engineer around to have a company that will actually be able to get in and, they know what they build and they're very good at supporting those. WideOrbit's another one where, they'll do some limited support. But, the issue that you run into is, generally you're the boots on the ground. So you're going to have to support this. So as you go to buy the hardware, keep that in mind. What is your tolerance for pain? You can go into virtualization. You can go into server class hardware with multiple, power supplies and things like that. What we do is we use just off the shelf PCs. We keep parts nearby for them. But because of the way our automation systems load, we can spin up an automation system in about 10 minutes.
Oh, wow.
There is that. Yeah. So it really doesn't take much to get something on the air. Next thing we can talk about is sound cards. There's a lot of discussion these days about sound cards. To be perfectly honest with you, I have had stations that use the inbuilt sound card. It's on the motherboard.
Mm-hmm.
Sound cards have come a long way and they work fine. There is nothing wrong with those onboard sound cards. Now you could go with ASI and those sorts of things, keeping in mind that the more fancy you get with your sound cards, the more complicated drivers there are. And you have more of a situation where, your automation won't talk to the sound card, because that's the other thing is most automation systems natively talk to the sound card. They don't negotiate through Windows. So the sound card driver has to be compatible with the automation software. And, one of the benefits of sound cards is they have sound cards now that can squeeze and stretch. So if you're trying to fill in breaks, the sound card can actually slow down or speed up the audio pretty transparently to make sure that your breaks fit exactly right. So again, it's one of those, what is your option? If you're just doing voice tracking and music playout, built-in sound card is probably all you need. Again, keeping in mind that you need to segue multiple elements. So the engine of the automation system needs to be able to do that. But, that's all part of the research on the automation system. The manufacturers will tell you what they recommend. Nowadays a lot of systems can overlay 3 or 4 audio elements on a single output channel, and
Mm.
therefore, again, just grabbing that computer. Um, then there's audio over IP drivers, and I'll go a little bit over, like I mentioned, our secret sauce. We have found that 32-bit systems running Windows 7 work perfectly for Symbian. We have zero crashes. We have zero issues with anything failing. We had one machine run for a year before we did anything to it. So what we've done is we've stockpiled a bunch of computers with 32-bit hardware, and we keep all of our audio and everything backed up not only locally on a server, but also on Amazon AWS. So what we're able to do is when we bring in a new computer, we have a stockpile of them pre-built, bring them in, load Symbian on them, and then just download the music. And with Symbian, it will play even if the entire library isn't there yet. So we
Ah.
can start downloading, and once we get enough music in there for the next hour or two, that's all we need. And we'll kick it off, and everything else will download in the background. And because we keep local servers of all of the music, it only takes usually a good 45 minutes to load all of the music into the system. So, and we use Axia for our audio. So we just load an Axia driver on there, and we're good to go. Um, and again, that's the great thing about Axia driver is generally it just looks like a sound card. So you don't really need anything special to work with your automation system. You can get them. A lot of systems like WideOrbit have native Axia stuff built into them. We just use an off-the-shelf driver and it works just fine. So again, those are all things as you put these systems together, you need to think about, how much money do you have to spend on hardware? Is that something provided? Is that something you're going to have to spec out? Then after that, servers and things like that. How are you getting audio from one machine to another? Obviously you're not going to do all of your production on your on-air machines. You're going to have a production machine. How do you get that audio from the production machine to your on-air machine? What if you have multiple stations? How do you get it from one to all of them? What's a
Mm-hmm.
backup plan? Where do you store your audio? What happens if a machine crashes? Do you have a way to get back on the air with audio? Is that with dueling machines, a master and a slave? Is that with just, in our situation, we're willing to bite the bullet a little bit and be off the air for 10 minutes while we rebuild this machine? Um, do you want a machine at your transmitter site? Our bigger stations, we do that. We have a mirrored machine at a transmitter site because those are situations where we don't want to be off the air for 10 minutes or whatever. So,
Yeah.
all of those things. And again, that's where the hardware comes in. If you're putting something at a transmitter site, it's going to have to be a little more robust than something that you have at a data center or in your studio or whatever. And there's a whole other thing with studios. What is the fan noise like? Can you put it in the studio and have it loud enough? Without hearing the fans in the background. If you can't, where are you going to put it? Do you need to get a KVM to extend the keyboard video monitor from wherever that PC is out to, wherever your studio is? All things that really have to be thought about. GPIO. With Axia, you can use a node. You can use broadcast tool switchers. In our situation, we managed to hack Symbian to talk natively to Axia for audio switching. So we no longer need audio switches, these analog audio switches, to make audio changes. We can do it all in the audio over IP domain by hacking.
Yeah.
Because again, with something like Symbian, it's not as I don't want to say it's not as polished, but it requires a little bit of a curve to get it all to work. But because of that, we also have access to a lot of the internals on how the system works, and we're able to make those things happen. Just like using Axia or Livewire, where you can actually get into the guts and make it do a lot of different things. So that may be something too that you're going to want to consider.
Wow. A lot of information here. And I wanted to mention that for my own automation computers, and ours are now all Windows. In fact, they're all Windows 10 for the actual computers that are running our automations. I do go, I before we put it on the air, I do the whatever the latest Windows update is. And then I go into the group policy editor, GP edit. and I go and find configure automatic updates. There's a big, huge, long list, miles long, of things that you can edit in the group policy editor. And I go find the one for configure automatic updates, and I go tell it to disable. And so far, in all cases, except for one that's been a little problematic, in all cases that has worked. The computer has never tried to go do an update. Now, if I've got the computer offline for a while and I'm doing some other things to it, I may go update it. But remember, these computers are not being used to browse the web. They're not being used for email. They're just sitting there playing audio, and they're not even connected for web voice tracking. That's our file server, that typically where the voice tracking connects to. The remote voice tracking. Do you have an opinion about that kind of policy? I don't want them rebooting while it's on the air, obviously.
Right. Well, a couple of quick thoughts on that. Number one is if at all possible, don't let your machines touch the internet at all. And as terms of updates, if you've got a revision of Windows that is working fine, don't update it. There's really no reason to do it, especially if your machines aren't online. There's really no reason to update a Windows machine if it's working well for you. It's not going to expire. It's not going to change. So there's really no reason to do that. The second thing is, as I mentioned before, keep it off the internet if you can. There are a lot of different ways to, configure firewalls, configure networking nowadays to where those machines can still get what they need to get without going out online. And, that is the biggest threat to these automation systems is ransomware and viruses. So if you can keep those off of the public internet, again, you can use an older version of Windows. You can do all kinds of things and not have to worry about it. So, again, I know a lot of, and that even goes with updating the automation software. A lot of people go, oh, gee, got a new update out. Don't be a beta tester. Let it burn for a year if you don't need the fixes or the features. There's nothing wrong with using older versions if they're working for you.
Well, Chris, I got mine doing a little Bitcoin mining, during the quiet songs, when they're not too busy, they're doing some Bitcoin mining there.
Don't do it overnight when, you don't care about the segues or the audio getting choppy.
That's right. Hey, we got to take our last quick break. Chris is going to have a tip of the week for us on this topic of radio station automation. This is really a big, wide topic. We could probably do several episodes about this, but we won't. But we'll do this one. Our show is brought to you in part by our friends at Vox Pro. Let's hear about that from St. John. Go ahead.
Hey, what's happening? St. John here, coming to you from Command Central, and wanted to tell you about the absolute best partner you can have in radio. I'm talking about, boom, Wheatstone's Vox Pro. Now, a lot of folks have used previous versions of Vox Pro, all awesome, but I want to tell you about some of my favorite new features in 7. And for folks who've never used Vox Pro before, I'm about to tell you why it's an absolute game changer and essential for really fast-paced multi-element radio. Lots of different audio software out there. Why Vox Pro? Because it was designed for radio. It's the only software designed to do what we needed to do, which is record, edit, playback in real time. When I say lightning fast, I'm going to show you how fast you can edit stuff up in Vox Pro right now. So literally 3 clicks on the controller, mark left, mark right, everything that gets marked, you hit delete, it goes away. It's literally that fast. So we're going to take this part right here. Boom. From caller 9 to him saying, I'm ready.
Ready for that secret sound.
Boom. All of that stuff, hit delete, it goes away. Here's your edit.
You are tackling secret sound, caller 9. I'm ready, St. John.
So one of the best features of version 7, this is awesome. It's effects macros, and you can literally put a chain of effects together so that instead of having to normalize a phone bit and then use noise reduction on it and EQ it and all that, you can literally build a chain. One button, this one's called call right here. I just click that. All of those processes happen instantaneously. Literally saves 80% of your editing and cleanup time. Final thing that I love about Vox Pro, and there's so much more to get into, but one of my favorite things, you can load it on a laptop. I've literally done my show from a hotel room in Armenia to the conference room at, this was fun, jury duty. Great thing, no one could tell the difference. Vox Pro makes it totally easy. Telling you, if you're looking for the best on-air partner, call my friends at Wheatstone, ask them about Vox Pro, and you will be glad you did.
And of course, Vox Pro is available from Broadcasters General Store. Their website is bgs.cc. bgs.cc. Call them. That's what I do at 352 622-7700. They love phones, and they are all set up to help you instantly on the phone when you call them up. BGS is just a wonderful broadcast dealer, and they carry Vox Pro. They'll get you one right out, give you a good price on it, too. They got sharp pencils there. Thanks, BGS, for sponsoring This Week in Radio Tech. All right, Chris Tarr, we're about out of time, and I'm sure you have a tip of the week for us.
Actually, I have two. First tip is when looking at automation systems, don't just go by price, don't just go by features. Take your time, because this is a purchase that you're going to have to live with for a long time, and you're going to have to live with what you get. So be very, do a lot of research. Measure twice, measure three times, cut once when it comes
It's
to
kind of like
automation.
getting married, isn't
Second
it?
one,
It's like getting married.
it is. It's very much like getting married. So my second one is I just got this from Amazon. This is kind of cool. It is like a 4-in-1 USB charging cable. So if you notice here, there's a USB-C, but then it's now a USB-A. Over here, you see USB-C. Now it's Lightning for Apple. I thought this was really clever because I have a lot of devices that I bring with me on the road that have all kinds of different connectors. So, this will save me from carrying a whole bunch of cables.
Gotcha. Wow. That's a good advice. Too good. You're ruining my budget here. I don't have money to pay you for all these tips.
That's all right. Well, that's how I afford these little toys like this is from you paying me. So there you go.
Oh, well, there you go. Okay. All right. Chris Tarr, I really enjoy it when we get to just do a show, just you and me together. I learn so much. I get to learn from a trusted friend, a trusted engineer who goes through these little battles, these little challenges every day. And you experience, the challenges, and I'm sure you've tried various different fixes, and you come up with a fix that works for you and could very well work for other people too. So it's really good to spend the whole hour with you. I learn a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, and I love sharing it. It's the advice isn't for everybody. There are people a lot smarter than me that have figured some of this stuff out, but I like to share that kind of practical advice because we've all been there, and this job's hard enough without getting that kind, being able to get that kind of advice.
Something that we should do. We might make it a little tradition here on TWiRT, and that is we need to give thanks to our producer Suncast. So I'm going to give Suncast a little salute. And Chris, maybe you want to give there you go. Thank you. Thank you, Suncast. Appreciate you very much keeping up with our crazy show and my crazy typed directions that are, offline. You don't see those. So thanks so much, Suncast, for your show. And Chris, thank you. Maybe we'll see you next week on this show about about noise on the AM band. And
looking forward to it.
If you can't make it next week, make it the week after for sure for our female engineer, Megan.
Awesome.
Okay. All right.
Great.
Thanks a lot, Chris. Good to see you. And we'll see you next week on This Week in Radio Tech.